Hello and welcome to album review number 24. Today I'm going to be reviewing Larks Tongues and Aspic by King Crimson. This is to celebrate the 50-year anniversary of King Crimson's first album, In the Court of the Crimson King. You're probably maybe wondering, why aren't you reviewing In the Court of the Crimson King? Why are you reviewing Larks Tongues and Aspic? Larks Tongues and Aspic is my personal favourite King Crimson album, and there's three other bands who released their first albums in 1969 that I absolutely love. And before the end of the year, I will review my favourite albums of them as well. So I'm going to review my favourite albums and not their first. Also, just to let you know, one of the bands is Yes, and I haven't actually listened to their first album straight through. Same with Genesis. Genesis is another one, 1969. I haven't listened to from Genesis to Revelation from start to finish, so I can't really review it anyway, and I don't really have any intentions of listening to it straight through. So I'm going to review Larks Tongues and Aspic today. Larks Tongues and Aspic was released in 1973, and it was the first King Crimson album after a 2-year hiatus. It's their fifth studio album, and the first with this lineup. Well, it's the only one with this 5-member lineup, but it was the first album of the sort of second era. King Crimson's albums have kind of gone in sort of like 4 stages. The first 4 albums were stage 1, then the next 3, then the next 3, then the next 3. Sort of separated by not only sound and style, but separated by the gaps of how many years there were in between as well. And of course, the sounds, like the early stuff was more jazzy. Larks Tongues and Aspic Red era was kind of more experimental, more complex, more instrumental. In the 80s, kind of more math rock, kind of new wavy style, and then in the 90s to the early 2000s, more kind of industrial progressive metal. So this was the first of the more experimental era, where huge chunks of the album, if not like most of the album, would be instrumental. I'd probably say that most of this album is instrumental if you judge it by time length. There's 6 tracks. The first, fifth, and sixth are instrumental, but they take up more than half of the album. So more than half of this album is instrumental. Um, Side 1 is Larks Tongues and Aspic Part 1, and it is, I'm pretty sure, King Crimson's second longest track, uh, behind Lizard from the studio album of the same name. I'm sorry if you can hear a dog barking. I live in a place that has loads of dogs, so sorry about that. It's 13 and a half minutes and it's fully instrumental. And if you were a King Crimson fan, obviously I wasn't born when this album came out, but if I was a King Crimson fan and I had listened to the 4 previous albums, I definitely would have been very surprised by the sound. There's maybe a couple of hints. Like there's quite a lot of violin and Islands. I think that's probably why Robert Fripp got David Cross in the band. I should probably mention the new lineup. Bill Buford joined King Crimson after leaving Yes, after doing Close to the Edge. Jamie Muir joined the band as sort of a additional percussion player. He was only in the the band for this one album. John Wetton was on bass and vocals. He did 3 albums, including this one, and David Cross, who was on violin and sometimes mellotron. Of course, you've got Robert Fripp. So yeah, there are some hints, sort of violin sounds. It's not like a totally different band. Every King Crimson album sounds a bit different, and each era sounds very different, but they all have that King Crimson atmosphere, that King Crimson sort of vibe, if you know what I mean. Like, I remember a few years ago, I had a friend who the only King Crimson album they'd heard was In the Court of the Crimson King, and I let them hear a bit of Discipline, and they were like, "This does not sound like King Crimson to me." Understandable, but I think it does say very much sounds like King Crimson. Every King Crimson album sounds very much King Crimson, even if they sound totally different to the ear. It's the atmosphere and the vibe that make King Crimson what it is. But anyway, Larks Tongues and Aspic starts with sort of some strange percussion sounds. It sort of sounds like kind of glockenspiel, sort of some sort of bells ringing. I don't know the names of all these instruments. It sort of says drums and percussion and all kinds of percussion sounds in this album, especially during the instrumental tracks. And then you get a very sinister violin piece with some heavy bass sounds, and then a drum fill, and then it kicks in the. This right here, is, you can tell this is going to be a different kind of King Crimson, a heavier, perhaps darker King Crimson than of the previous albums. more heavy bass lines, very much a distorted bass sound. The guitar in the first four albums are more played rhythm. There's more doodle 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 sort of stuff like that going on here. There's more complex guitar picking, um, and the drumming, of course. Bill Buford's my personal favorite drummer, and his drumming style is so complex, and it just adds so much to this track. The track goes all over the place. It's got quiet bits. It's got small pauses, but all around it's quite. The song has a lot of oomph. So that's the first 13 minutes of the album, and from the very first time I listened to it, I absolutely loved Larks Tongues and Aspic Part 1. It's a fantastic instrumental track. One of the best instrumental prog rock tracks ever, I'd say. For 1973, it is quite heavy, to be honest. Track 2 is Book of Saturday, which is probably my personal least favourite song on the album, but it's still good. It's the shortest. It's just a wee nice song that has quite interesting lyrics, and it introduces, of course, John Wetton's voice. This was the first time you'll hear John Wetton sing, and you can hear right here that the band gel in both melodic and sort of the softer, quieter sort of tones and the heavier tones. They gel very well. Bill Buford, John Wetton, Robert Fripp, David Cross. They very much work together very well, whether they're doing quiet songs or more heavy songs. Exiles, track 3. This is my personal all-time favourite King Crimson song. Exiles. I absolutely love it. I've never actually met anyone or talked to anyone who shares that opinion. A lot of people say Starless, songs like that. There's just something about Exiles that I absolutely love. It starts off, it's kind of hard to describe the sound. It kind of sounds like a sort of coyote yowling or something. I don't know what it is. And then really somber but beautiful mellotron comes in. And it's quite a simple song. You think of King Crimson and you think of complex time signatures and all that. This is quite a simple song. It is 7 minutes, but in terms of the song structure, it's quite simple, and in terms of the time signatures, it's also quite simple. It's beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard in my life, Exiles, and I'd really suggest anyone listen to it. John Wetton's the way he sings is so beautiful in it. Throughout the majority of the song, Robert Fripp's just on acoustic guitar, and the violin's really beautiful, and Bill Buford and Jamie Muir just sort of keeping the pace going with some really nice drumming. For me, what really stands out is Robert Fripp's guitar solo near the end. It's one of the most beautiful guitar solos I've ever heard, and it's just so subtle and so beautiful, and it's such an underrated song. Really, you've got to listen to it if you haven't. Any prog rock band probably has heard it, but it's one of the most underrated songs ever in terms of prog rock, because you don't when they talk about this album, they'll talk about Larks Tongues and Aspic Part 1 or Easy Money or Larks Tongues and Aspic Part 2. They often leave out Exiles. I adore Exiles. It's easily, in my opinion, the best King Crimson song. One of the best songs of all time. I absolutely love it. And that guitar solo at the end is just so beautiful. And the mellotron as well. It's so somber, like I said, but so beautiful. There's a hope to it as well. A lot of King Crimson music doesn't seem very hopeful, but Exiles is very, very beautiful. Love the lyrics by Palmer James as well. I almost forgot to mention that. Side 2, Easy Money. Easy Money is you've always got at least one King Crimson song that's kind of the sort of Larks Tongues, 21st Century Schizoid Man sort of vibe, with long instrumental section, not really dark or somber, but slightly kind of heavier. It's definitely a strange one, Easy Money. I probably don't enjoy it as much as most King Crimson fans. It's never been one of my absolute favourite King Crimson songs, but it definitely deserves its place on the album, and I've always quite liked it. Like I said, it's not one of my absolute favourites, but I do like it. It's got sort of heavy guitar playing. It's got a sort of long instrumental section, which in a way sort of hints towards Starless sort of later on. And it's got a good sort of funky vibe to it. which is another thing. Their earlier albums didn't have much of a kind of funky vibe. These newer ones do. You kind of get a wee bit of this in other songs like "The Great Deceiver" from Starless and Baby Black. There's a bit of that in it, where you get singing, and overall it does kind of sound quite simple. But the subtle guitar sounds and the sort of drumming is kind of what makes it more complex than it kind of sounds. Good song. Track 5, the talking drum, is an instrumental, and the rest of the album's an instrumental from here on out. This is another one that's totally underrated. It just starts off with some sort of drum fills, and then you get the bass line going. It's just sort of in a way, it's kind of like a very early proto sort of industrial dance track. You could probably picture this with a sort of like an experimental industrial sort of remix on it with some, I don't know, heavy bass sounds, and it would work. I love prog rock, but I also love electronic music, especially the more experimental electronic sounds, and I think this would really work. It's one of those sort of songs that's tracks that starts off slow and just builds and builds and builds, and the intensity just gets higher and higher and higher and higher and higher, until it's a full on rock out headbanging track. Very underrated. You know, it's got a doo doo beat from start to finish. It's just the same beat. It's in 4/4, but you know the guitar starts, the violin's very sinister. It's a very sinister track. And then the guitar starts going Robert Fripp, and then the extremely distorted John Wetton bass sound comes in like that, and it's just a total rock out heavy metal track. It is heavy metal, and I love it. Absolutely love the talking drum, and I also love the absolute ear piercing squeal at the end. It's just sort of like, yeah, that's King Crimson. That's what they do. Then final track, Larks Tongues and Aspic Part 2, one of the greatest instrumentals of all time, and probably the best Larks Tongues and Aspic piece of the 5. Part 3 is on Thief of a Perfect Pair. Part 4 is on Construction of Light, and then level 5 is on Power to Believe. I didn't actually know that level 5 was part of Larks Tongues and Aspic, because it's not called Larks Tongues and Aspic Part 5, it's just called level 5. I didn't really know what level 5 meant, but it turns out that it actually counts as a part of the Larks Tongues and Aspic sort of song thing, the series, I suppose. But Larks Tongues and Aspic's brilliant, and it goes instantly right from the talking drum. The talking drum just heavy bass line, and then you hear this ear piercing squeal for about 5 or 6 seconds, and then it's heavy as well. It's another fantastic heavy track. That's another thing I love this album. It's really heavy. It's like I'd very much consider Larks Tongues and Aspic on the whole to be a heavy metal album. And you can see where King Crimson get their heavy metal stuff from their later years, from like the Thrack, Construction of Light era. Very much heavy metal. Progressive metal here, probably in its very early stages, I'd say. And grunge. The bit in Larks Tongues and Aspic that goes that's probably the first ever grunge riff. It's so grungy, and it's got that grunge sound to it. It's got it's got that grunge attitude in it that bands like Nirvana and Soundgarden had. It's 15 years ahead of its time, that riff, and it's absolutely amazing. This album, Larks Tongues and Aspic, had some of the earliest sounds of some of the most forward-thinking music you'd ever hear, and decades ahead of its time. Like you've got grunge, you've got progressive metal, you've got all kinds of sounds in it, and of course you've got the quieter, more somber bits like Exiles, Book of Saturday, but it's the heavy metal stuff that sort of stands out on this album. My personal favourite song is Exiles on it. It's another great thing about the album is it's a fantastic through listen. It flows from start to finish very, very well. And for album rock, like King Crimson, prog rock bands probably consider them album rock. It's very important for an album to flow well from start to finish, and Larks Tongues and Aspic very much does this. So that's pretty much all I can say about it. It's one of the greatest albums ever made, and it's absolutely amazing, and I love it so much. Thanks for watching. I do apologise that I haven't been making my videos recently. I very much plan on making more and doing them more frequently. I just got my new phone. That I had to use my old phone broke, and then I had to use my girlfriend's old one, and that didn't have much space. So we got a new one now, and hopefully get back on track with the videos. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.